Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 20 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Karl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today by Datadog sporting T-shirt principal cloud engineer, Jon Goodall. How are you doing today, Jon?
Warm. I am warm. I wore this because, like lots of merch shirts, it's very, very thin, this shirt.
Yes,
I
the
am
Datadog
warm.
T-shirts are quite thin. I also found the HashiCorp T-shirt quite thin.
Yeah, that's quite
light,
thin.
So, not too hot in this rather warm weather we're having, heat wave we're having here in the UK. But we're not here to talk about the weather. We are here to talk about AWS news as usual. And we are joined by fellow AWS Community Builder, Malte Polley. How are you doing today, Malte?
I'm fine as well, thank you. We also have heat wave in Germany. And if you want to have thick swagwear, go with Matillion t-shirts.
I don't have any Matillion t-shirts, but it sounds like they are best to wear as a base layer in the winter, perhaps.
Definitely. Great hoodies.
I think our Logi swag is pretty thick, actually, because we've got 3 or 4 different versions. The t-shirt's a decent thickness, and then we did because you like swag, don't you, Karl? Because we did.
I do like swag.
Hoodies for the offsite in 2023, and they're pretty thin. And then the normal hoodies sort of a good thickness, and then we've got was it Helly Hansen ones that we've got, the big thick winter ones, which our northern colleagues like quite a lot because it's cold up north.
Yeah, it's possibly the warmest jumper on the planet. Certainly the warmest jumper I own, and you can only wear it for about 3 days of the year. It's too hot to wear it any other day, unless you open all the doors of your house and let the heat out. So
back when I worked in my garden shed office, which I don't work in there anymore, my shoffice, it got a lot more use then because that room, I had a little radiator and kind of all the rest of it, but that room was still quite hard to keep warm until I put a much bigger radiator out there. So it probably got warm for 6 to 8 weeks when I was working in there in the wintertime, just because, but it doesn't come with gloves and typing was still tricky.
Yeah. It's actually a cunning ploy, really. If people ask for a pay rise, I can just say to them, turn your heating down and wear the Logicata jumper. This is good equivalent to a pay rise. Anyway, we're not here to talk about weather and swag. We are here to talk about AWS news. But before we do, Malte, tell us a little bit about yourself. I introduced you as a fellow AWS community builder, but tell us, what do you do for the community? What do you do for a living?
Yeah, basically, I'm working in the field of data and AI. So I'm strongly focused at the moment, obviously, on generative AI, like everyone, right? I started in the statistic rabbit hole, right? Before generative AI popped up. I'm creating data platforms with the AWS ecosystem partners, Matillion, Snowflake, precisely for a German financial service broker at the moment. Yeah.
Cool. So if you're in statistics, you were just making things up then. Do you remember that Twitter account, the made up statistics? It was great. I used to love
that. Never trust one you haven't cheated on, right?
So I mentioned your fellow AWS community builder. We've all just had the pleasure of receiving our renewal emails at the weekend. So I was renewed into year 4 of the community builder program, I think, which is actually my 5th year because I did year 1 twice because they decided they didn't want me, and then they decided they did want me again, which is obviously a very traumatic experience for me. So now every year when I'm waiting for that email, there's a lot of anxiety, but I was very pleased.
See, I think it's your proximity to me because it was before we worked together that you got in and then kicked out again. And then since we've worked together and we applied at the same time, you've stayed in. So I think it's proximity to me.
Could be, but you wouldn't have been in if it wasn't for my recommendation.
Well, not recommendation, more you can't recommend people into the program, but it's
I recommend you apply.
No.
So and Malte, I think you're in going into your 2nd year as a community builder.
Yeah, that's right. So I started in DevOps last year and renewed in DevOps again, I think. I don't really know, actually. And I focused. I'm focusing a lot in my walks and talks on CDK deployments. So I fell in love with the Cloud Development Kit, I think 2019 something, when they announced it at reInvent. And Werner Vogel said, this is the new way. And definitely since these days, it's my way to create deployments, basically.
Yeah, the categories for a data-driven company, the categories of CBs are just a bit kind of pointless. It's to to classify new people, I think, so that they get a range of people coming in that are interested in kind of different things, so that they're going to get something out of it, and so that people that are likely to talk about those things are joining the program. But it doesn't really stop you from talking about other stuff. You can change category if you really want to, which I've never understood why, right? Because former CB and now AWS community hero Stephen Sennett has come on, and he was in what was he in? He was in content delivery and networking as a CB, and he basically never spoke about that. It's just this is the thing that you were brought into. Like, I'm serverless, and I largely talk about serverless, but I talk about AI quite a lot as well these days, because weirdly you need things to call AI, so I kind of can do serverless and AI and event driven and kind of stay in my box, but you don't have to talk about the things that's in your category.
Yeah. Honestly, it's hard from the outside, right? Because I'm writing end-to-end tests articles about AI-driven pipelines, right? So it's kind of weird. So what is this guy talking about? Obviously, data as use case, but DevOps as implementation method. Yeah.
So what led you to apply for the program 2 years ago?
Basically a night in Las Vegas.
Fair enough.
I was at reInvent and one of these top golf areas, right? And I lost the bet, so I'm pretty bad in golf. But then I won a 12 articles in 12 months series, and I did this in 2024. So every month a DevTO article, and based on that, I joined the program. Yeah.
Cool. Well, great to meet you, Malte. Thank you for sharing your AWS Community Builder journey. We're all looking forward to getting some new Community Builder swag through the post shortly.
I'm looking forward to my Amazon credits for AWS
credits. Oh, yeah.
Need them. Need them to pay for Kiro.
They won't last you long in Kiro.
Are they applicable?
Credits, so.
Oh, yeah. If you
okay.
sign up for Kiro through the console, you can use credits to pay for Kiro.
Okay. Yeah, it's always a weird thing that the vouchers are not applicable for all services. Like buying a domain, something which is still
that's because Amazon don't do that. They no, they hand that on. I'm very familiar with that because I'm a bit of a domain hog. I have lots of them. They hand that off to a third party called Gandhi. So they are basically just passing the money straight through. They don't see that one at all. So there's a few things like that. The one that really bites people, that really catches people out, is token costs for third-party AI models and marketplace charges, and they don't count.
Well, there we go. A little lesson on credits, but that was not on the agenda for today. What is on the agenda for today is regular listeners to the podcast will know. Once a week, I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John picks a selection of articles from the newsletter that we share with our guest to talk to you about on the podcast. So we do have such a selection for this week. And the first is an announcement on the AWS website about ExtendDB, an open source Dynamo DB compatible adapter. So, John, what was it that caught your eye about ExtendDB?
That Corey Quinn has already plumbed Route 53 and is a backend for ExtendDB.
That's not in this article, but I assume he has written an article where he has done
It was a little thing I saw on his LinkedIn, because I think I'm connected or follow him on LinkedIn, and one of the guys that probably worked on this, Lee Hannigan, if you see his name on the GitHub repo, I met him in Newcastle last year. Really nice guy, was part of the service team, I think, for DynamoDB itself, and now he does some other bits and pieces, and his name is all over this GitHub repo as well, so I saw his LinkedIn post as well. Nice guy. And this is really interesting because DynamoDB is one of those brilliant services that up until this existed only lived in the cloud. And for me, as a DevOps sysadmin architectural type, that was fine. Right? I didn't really care. I didn't give a monkeys, but that I couldn't test things locally because I'll just run all my tests in the cloud. I run integration tests, unit tests. I'll just mock them or whatever. It kind of doesn't matter. You couldn't have a full local setup that involved DynamoDB. Now you can. That's what ExtendDB is doing, right? It looks, acts, feels like DynamoDB, but it has pluggable storage backends, which is a horrible term. But the short version is currently it comes with, I think, one backend that you can use, and possibly two now that Corey's done his nonsense. so that you can then run something that looks, smells, and feels like Dynamo DB on your own machine, which for local dev setup is fantastic for doing things in a really cool NoSQL database style without having to use Dynamo DB. Maybe you want to run it on bare metal. You can do that too, right? So this is a really, really cool service. It's version 0.1, so it's very, very, very new. It's probably not considered ready for production, but the use cases, it spells them out, right? Local development, CI/CD pipelines, self-hosted deployments, multi-cloud. So you can run DynamoDB because as long as you can get access to a Postgres database, you can run DynamoDB in Azure if you feel that way inclined. So you could do that, and things like air-gapped environments as well. So you've got this really nice, powerful NoSQL database that's just the best thing in the world to use for that use case, as far as I've ever come across, but certainly for what I've done with it. And you don't have to run it in AWS anymore, and it's open source and kind of free and stuff.
I love free stuff. What are your thoughts on this, Malte? Can you see yourself using it?
No, I haven't. In the past, I worked with Local Stack and also with the NoSQL Workbench, right? So there were familiar projects in the past where you can spin up something like this. I totally agree. If you have local setups, this is pretty worth to take a look on it. Something which really changed my early developer experience was also the serverless repository and kicking off Lambda functions in local Docker containers, right? So if you have these kind of requirements, then you should definitely give it a try. Yeah. I would never use a developer tool in production, honestly, John. So strongly reject that idea. In production, I would go with the original one.
I must admit, I did think when you said it's probably not production ready, I'm thinking, would it ever go into production? It's a
I don't know. You have the choice.
No, you could. Yeah. I mean, WordPress exists.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough. I also thought local stack when you were describing it, John. But I guess this is just one part of the stack. Was DynamoDB available in local stack? I've never used it.
It is, yeah. I just in front of this podcast, I looked it up. So it's available like a lot of other AWS services, right? So if you don't want to bear with development costs in a development environment, local stack is also worth to take a look on. Yeah.
Cool. Probably worth just saying a little bit about local stack then. We're kind of assuming that everybody knows what we're talking about. I don't know if you want to just walk us through that, Malte.
Yeah, a bit from my memory. So basically, it's a foundational layer, right? You can install it anywhere, and it can mock AWS services, right? So without bringing up intensive mock frameworks, which would be another solution, right? If you want to have an environment which behaves like AWS services, right? Local stack is one way to spin it up on your whatever local machine on your local server, and then feels like AWS, but it's not AWS. Yeah.
It's been a while since I've looked at local stack, I must admit, and they've had a lot of updates lately, but certainly when I last used it, all I found it good for was testing things like CloudFormation, Terraform deployments. You can't actually interact with it. We certainly couldn't back then. So this is where something like ExtendDB is really good because you can actually interact with it and use it. Local stack is great for saying, yes, it exists, and you can kind of mock the API in responses and things, but it's not actually there doing things, storing data. It's just good for tests, but not necessarily good for anything beyond basic testing. But as I say, I've not used it for years.
So maybe it got better. But there we go. Let's move on to our second article for this week. And this is another announcement, a feature announcement on the Amazon website. AWS Security Hub now uncovers identity risks from unused access. So, of course, we should all be clearing up that unused access during regular audits, but often people don't, as we know. So, John, what are your thoughts on this new feature in Security Hub?
Well, I don't know that this is new or not. I know it's new for Security Hub, right? But IAM Access Analyzer already does this. So I'm kind of struggling to see what this is doing, because I think what this is doing in truth is it's just Security Hub is now making a service-linked IAM Access Analyzer and using the existing tools, right? I can't remember which one's free and which one's really expensive, because there's unused access and external access. And I can never remember which one's which. I think external is the freebie and unused is horrifically expensive. Like, it's really expensive. Obviously, if you're spending, I don't know, 100 grand a month, you're probably not going to notice. But if you're spending 5 grand a month, you're going to feel that one. And it's that kind of level of pain in terms of it. But it's really, really important to understand keys that aren't being used, haven't been rotated, users that aren't around anymore. This is a thing that we deal with our customers and do for some of our customers as well, where it's a case of here's all the users for this month, here's when they last logged in, do you still need them? We'll go and get rid of them. And this is things that audit teams are doing manually, that we're doing through basic scripting, because, you know, unused access through an IAM access analyzer is quite so expensive and certainly doesn't support kind of everything you'd want it to. It's good to see that it's being integrated into Security Hub, because Security Hub version 2, which is now just Security Hub, and Security Hub version 1 is now called Security Hub Cloud Security Posture Management, or something like that, CSPM, I think. I couldn't tell you exactly what that stands for, but something like that, posture management. So it's good to see that Security Hub is still getting some love, getting some things being added to it, and that Amazon is very much trying to make it the single source of truth for anything security related within your account. I don't know if Security Agent is tying into Security Hub. I would like to think it is. It could probably certainly read it. But like I say, good to see that Security Hub's getting some love. Good to see that this feature is being pulled into Security Hub. It still doesn't address the broader problem I have with unused access analyzers, which is they are just so expensive. So this doesn't solve for that, but it solves for some of the other things, like I say. And centralization is good.
Malte, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, basically, as Jon said, right, Security Hub is some kind of aggregation layer, right? Not only for IAM Access Analyzer, but also for Guard Duty and all the stuff, right? Third-party tools can be integrated. So it's good to have now a native integration here, especially on this IAM Access Analyzer topic. Basically, you could also write relatively easy your own scripts, right? So IAM has good APIs, which gives you the thing, and which can then also emit events to Security Hub if you want to, right? So I don't want to bear with the Security Hub, but as Jon pointed out, they lost track somehow on the service, because you always have to think about which security service in which aggregation layer, right? And somehow from a customer perspective, it feels a bit like that there's not a real strategy around Security Hub and integration of other AWS security related services.
You find this though with AWS generally, and I've always said this is an artifact of the two pizza team culture of Amazon more generally, and it works, right? Because, you know, each team is big enough to be fed by two pizzas, which is an American pizza, not a German or a British pizza, which are rather smaller, like American pizzas. You buy them by the slice, and they're sort of, the slice is this big. Like, that's a whole medium pizza in the UK. That's a whole pizza. So it's American size, it's sort of this big, but you can feed a team on two pizzas. The downside of that is what I think you see occasionally is there's a much poorer cross-team strategy. And you see that kind of behavior as a result.
What caught my eye in this article, particularly off the back of your comment, Jon, about these things being quite expensive, is that it says when you enable Security Hub for your org, a service-linked IAM Access Analyzer is automatically created in each member account with no additional config required. So it's easy to set them up, but potentially that's going to run your bill up quite significantly. I wonder if it's easy to turn them off if you don't want them. I mean, you probably do want them, right? If you're using this sort of thing, you probably do want them, but perhaps if the cost is going to be excessive.
Yeah, don't know. And this depends on where the evaluation is being done, because it's saying that Security Hub is doing the evaluation, not the Access Analyzer. So time will tell.
Yeah, but from the nature of the service, basically, you have events from the integrations, right? And Security Hub is mapping them against controls, right? So this is basically the separation of the two layers here.
Definitely good to be using Security Hub, though, and lots of new features and third-party integrations being announced with Security Hub at the moment. So if you haven't looked at it, it's well worth a look. And that's another reason for you to go and look at it. Let's move on to our next article for this week. This is an article on the DevOps and Developer Productivity blog. And the title is Automate Root Cause Analysis Across Datadog, which I guess is why Jon wore his T-shirt, not just because it was hot.
No, just because it was hot. Didn't even cross my mind.
no Elasticsearch swag that I'm aware of that anybody's sporting on the podcast, but this is an article about automating root cause analysis across Datadog and Elasticsearch with AWS DevOps Agent. So we mentioned AI. This is our first kind of AI flavored article this week. We've spoken about the DevOps agent before, but this is a bit more of a use case of how you might actually use it with some third-party vendor integrations as well. So, John, thoughts on this one?
Look at the absolute state of that architecture diagram. Look at the absolute state of that, right? You've got Kubernetes in place for, I don't quite understand why. You've got a daemon set for FileBeat to send logs as a log collector. They get shipped out to CloudWatch. Stuff gets shipped out to CloudTrail. Fine. You're also connecting FileBeat to Elasticsearch, which is where your logs are going. And you've got Datadog Envira sidecar for Kubernetes. You've got a custom MCP server for Elk. You've got webhooks for Datadog. Then you've got the agent layer, which has got the agent space and RAG and learned topology. And that's reading the CloudWatch logs, and that's reading all the FileBeat stuff via MCP. And that's then being run by the agent to give you some information. What? This is horrifically complicated. And I think, to be honest, it's just an excuse to rag on Kubernetes, if I'm being really honest, because this is just horrifically complicated as a way of getting logs out of something like Kubernetes into something that DevOps Agent can actually read. And this is, as a result, ridiculously expensive, because even, running OpenSearch or managed Elasticsearch, and that's really interesting too, because you're now actually using Elasticsearch back inside AWS again, and that was a bit kind of a no for several years, and now you can again, I think. So that's an interesting one. But yeah, the state of this, just to get some AI tools to be able to correlate some events between things. You've got two different partner things. You've got Kubernetes. You've got logs flying around everywhere. You've got webhooks. It's a mess.
There's probably a big chunk of that existed before the DevOps agent integration, if that's how they were doing logs before, into Elasticsearch and metrics and monitors into Datadog. And potentially there's some other vendors, non-AWS environments dumping stuff in there as well to justify the complexity. I don't know. Those are not represented on the diagram. Definitely an AI generated diagram that you can spot them a mile off. But what are your thoughts on it, Malte?
I read the article. I had the same feeling. So I went 3 or 4 times to Kubernetes Hell, basically to get the idea that it's not useful. And ECS, Elastic Container Service, is way fitting, a better fit in this situation. What I didn't get, basically, the article is saying every event has its own ID, and then you need a correlation ID. John, Karl, did you get where basically this correlation ID comes from? Because this is basically, as a data nerd, right? Where does the correlation ID comes from? I don't know. Don't have a clue, right? At the moment. Yeah, but generally speaking, the automation process, like having timelines and saying this is the second where we investigated that following this event. So if you really have huge systems, not only related to Kubernetes, but also to other services, it's probably worth to get at least an idea of the monitoring style and the architecture and the concepts, right? And probably you can adopt something when reading this article.
Yeah, I mean, this is not to rag on DevOps Agent. I'm very impressed with the output that it's got. It seems a very complicated way of getting the data into it. And I suppose that's because Kubernetes is a pain. If you're streaming logs out of ECS straight into CloudWatch logs, it's probably a lot easier because you don't need all the FileBeat stuff. You don't need the MCP. It's a lot easier to handle. So this is more Kubernetes overcomplicating things because it's Kubernetes. That's what happens. I remember not that long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, when I was looking at 7 years ago now, when I was looking at this and going, containers and Kubernetes, and I really want to get into that. I really want to understand all of that. And here I sit as a grizzled, slightly graying, definitely losing my hair principal engineer at this point going, I never want to look at Kubernetes ever again.
I guess the point of this article is there are probably people out there that have a big chunk of this stack and are thinking, well, how can I leverage some of these exciting new tools that AWS are launching? They're stuck with Elasticsearch, Datadog, etc. in their environment. And, this is to help them. I guess if you were building from scratch, you might not build it in this way because there are more cloud native services that you could be, or AWS native services that you could be leveraging rather than these third-party vendors. But, I suspect this is probably quite a standard configuration for infrastructures in large enterprises.
And the point the article's making is the difficulty isn't the amount of data, it's correlating all of that, right? Because you've got a message in Elasticsearch and a trace ID in an APM system and a pod name and a namespace in Kubernetes and a container image in ECR and metrics in Datadog, CloudWatch, deployment events in CloudTrail, and there's lots and lots and lots of different data points to kind of correlate. And for a human, that's difficult, but not impossible, because humans, we're still better than AI at this sort of thing, are able to take in huge amounts of data and spot weird things based on what feels like intuition, but you've just processed it, you've seen it enough times, you've gone, that's not right, because you've seen it enough times, right? That's just, you know what you're doing. You're a professional, you know what you're doing. And that's really hard for machines to be able to do. So the fact that it's now able to do that, that's really impressive.
The question is really where you put then the event root cause analysis, right? So if you're saying I have Datadog, right, then I probably assume that you don't want to have your operations team necessarily on AWS, right? So how did you get basically the root cause analysis from DevOps Agent to Datadog or something else to resolve the issue, right? So as you said, it's correlation and this broad thinking, right? Generative AI agents are, I don't know, IQ level 500, right? So they can do it in a fast way. That's definitely a reason to look at it. But basically, having one aggregation ID was also something we talked in 2020, 15, 16, 17 when Lambda came across, right? So it's really not related to Kubernetes in the end. No.
But yes, where the correlation ID comes from, that's the magic of cloud.
Exactly, and I just searched the website again, and I haven't found it. So
I did exactly the same. I did exactly the same, and it is referred to, but the secret source is not being shared. You got to have some proprietary knowledge, haven't you? You can't open source everything.
No,
exactly. Just open source all of Dynamo DB, though. That's fine.
I think we talk about AWS correlation ID service in 1.5 years, something, Karl, right? When you invite me the next time.
It'll be on a future episode of the podcast. Yeah, correlation ID as a service. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our next article which is on the AWS Security blog. And I don't know how you pronounce this. CERT, I suppose. CERT Insights. This is an acronym, 4-letter acronym, CIRT. Insights, how to prevent unauthorized account removals from AWS Organizations. So CERT does stand for the AWS Customer Incident Response Team. And those guys work with customers to help them recover from security incidents. So there are some insights here from the Customer Incident Response Team about preventing unauthorized account removals from AWS organizations. So I'll come to you first on this one, Malte. What are your thoughts here? Have you ever suffered from an unauthorized AWS account removal?
No, not so far. And
Good.
I love hack my own cloud strategies, right? And I really follow a strategy. I try to hack at least once a month my own company. So I will give it a try. Maybe can remove some accounts. As I'm also sometimes the judge to create our own landing zone, right? And the key of this article is basically get to know with service control policies, right? One thing which is not mentioned in the article, which is something we do and which I learned from the community basically, is that the root user basically should be denied, right? You should definitely have some kind of escalation. If you really need the root user, you need some kind of process to lift and shift the SCP for the usage and put it back afterwards, right? And this leave organization permission in the end is relatively easy cleared up by introducing a precisely defined service control policy here, right? But in the end, it's totally interesting what other customers see or experience, and probably this is if your main CRM is running in your production account and someone is stealing it by credential evaluation, that's really horrific. Yeah.
So, John, what's the impact of an unauthorized account removal I guess someone getting complete control of your workload in the account.
Yep. Well, sort of. So if you have an account that leaves the organization, you lose, and you're doing things properly and you're using either federated IAM and jumping across accounts, or ideally something like single sign-on or IAM IDC to get into those accounts, you lose complete and total access to it, right? Well, federated IAM you probably don't, but SSO you do. It's just gone. It's not in your org anymore. It's just no longer there. So if it's been removed from the org, you don't have access anymore. You can't do anything. You're dead in the water. Okay. Well, what does this mean? Well, this means that someone, depending on what's in your account, can do some serious reputational damage to your business. If they've stolen your production account and they've managed to steal the account, then they then have not unrestricted access to the resources within it, because if you've continued to do your job properly, then maybe they've managed to somehow do this without getting access to, your resources, your servers, your databases, your whatever. And that's a different equation. But they then are in a position where you can't stop them from continuously trying to do something, right? They could theoretically reset the root user if they manage to do that, and then that root user has access to do whatever it wants, and then they can start resetting passwords. They can start stealing your customer data. They can start defacing your website, because that's a risk. It's a reputational risk rather than a practical one, but it's a reputational risk because, have I been pwned? And then you've got this great big, I has all of your data with cats and memes and all the rest of it. Yes, okay, it's a teenager that's probably done that, but it doesn't look great for you, Mr. Investment Bank, or,
Yeah.
Mr. SaaS provider to such and such a market. It looks terrible. So it's a really big reputational risk. The other thing is it depends on what they've managed to get in that account, because if they've got your production, they've got the customer data, they can start to steal that. Like I say, they can also start to, if it's got your payment information in it, you can't then detach your payment information from it, and they can start to use your money to mine crypto, which is the obvious thing as well, right? Is if you've got access to someone's account and they can't stop you from doing anything in it, but you don't have access to the resources within the account, but you can make new stuff. I'm going to mine crypto, and then I'm just going to use your money to mine crypto until such and such a time as you block your credit card. That's kind of the only recourse you've got. And for a personal credit card, that's painful as it is, right? I've had that happen to me. Not in this scenario. I had someone swipe my credit card, clone my credit card somehow, and I got a call from my credit card provider saying, "You didn't happen to be in Paris and London within 10 minutes, did you?" No, I didn't. No. And by the way, did you also spend £900 in Asda? Yeah, no, that one was me. Unfortunately, that one was me. But the heuristics picked that up, and I had to get a new credit card number and reset it everywhere. It was so painful, and that was just little old me. And I was only 21 or 22. I didn't have a mortgage. I had some rent to pay, but it was really painful. For a business that is using credit cards, that has got to be an absolute nightmare scenario to have your card cloned, stolen, and you have to reset everything. I know from working in our business and doing other bits and pieces with business finance that when the card expires, naturally updating it everywhere that's used is a complete pain. So imagine having to do that under duress. So this is not something you want to have to happen to you. And as Malte said, this is actually really easy to prevent.
I just have one question on that, John. What were you spending £900 in Asda on at age 21? Sounds like an entire family shop.
I just moved out, so it was quite a lot of stuff. I was working for, here's a blast from the past. I was working for Debenhams at the time on my, they don't exist anymore, on my placement year, my year in industry as part of my degree course. And I just moved out of home and into a flat that I was renting for the year that I was down in Taunton. And I had to buy several weeks worth of food up front because, I had nothing, and I had to buy some appliances and various things for the flat because I didn't have, when you just move out, you don't have cutlery. So I had to go buy a lot of cutlery and random stuff like that. Hence, I spent £900 in Asda.
That's a lot of money to spend in Asda. But
It was about a month's wages at the time too. It was just,
I want to make one additional point, which the article is not discussing, right? So you talked about SSO and stuff like this. I don't know if you remember, but during the Corona times in 2021, there was a major Azure AD Active Directory outage, right? And we all rely on single sign-on. And this also applies to losing account access, right? So one of our strategies, which I would like to share, is that we intentionally create IAM access users with manual MFA, stuff like this, right? With admin access to avoid this Azure AD Active Directory outage situation, right? So you really need to think about how can you gain access or how to keep access, on your accounts, even if you have reliable third-party providers in your authentication methods.
Yeah, that's called a break glass user is the idea there.
Yeah.
And there's a few ways of doing that. As you say, you've got IAM users, which you could do. You could do federated IAM from an account that's not necessarily part of the org, or that is part of the org, but it's just a role that's trusted directly as opposed to being part of the SSO setup. So yeah, break glass is a really good point.
The only thing I have to add, nothing to do with AWS, is back on the Great British Retailers. Debenhams does still exist, John. It's now exclusively online, but I would advise you and any listeners to check out their Trustpilot reviews before purchasing.
So Debenhams as a company does not exist. The brand was bought by, I want to say, and I was very aware of this because they're very sad when they, ran out of money. I understand why they went into administration, because even when I was there, you could see it was being mismanaged. And this was, 20-year-old me seeing this and going, that's not right. So you could see that there was a problem. The brand was bought by, I believe, Mike Ashley of Sports Direct and a few other bits and pieces. So the business doesn't exist. It's online and the brand exists, but there's none of their staff work for them anymore. None of their fulfillment centers and distribution centers are doing anything. It's all being done, by someone else just under their brand. And I did actually get to go and look at one of their DCs up in Stevenage. Oh, that was impressively big.
But check those Trustpilot reviews. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week. And this is an article about the European Sovereign Cloud. It's an article on about Amazon.eu, and the title is Sovereignty Without Compromise. Who's choosing the AWS European Sovereign Cloud? And we're delighted to have a resident German with us today as a guest on our podcast, because whenever we've spoken about the European Sovereign Cloud on the podcast before, it's been with guests from Australasia, Southeast Asia, etc. We couldn't really be any further away from the European Sovereign Cloud than they were. But today we've got Malte with us, who's in Germany, which of course is where the European Sovereign Cloud is based. We've spoken about it on the podcast before. We kind of asked the question, well, who needs this? This article answers the question and lists out some of the companies who've already adopted the European Sovereign Cloud. So I'll come to you first again on this one, Malte, as it's in your homeland. What are your thoughts on European Sovereign Cloud and the people who are adopting it?
So maybe to give a broader context, what we have at the moment in Germany is some kind of a political atmosphere where you don't trust the US any longer due to the Trump administration. I want to go deeper into that, but this really drives this topic, right? So basically, we also have the discussions around standard cloud providers like Hetzner, like OHV, right? So do I still need to run things in AWS, or do I need something like the German Telekom, German Vodafone, Hetzner, whatever, right? And this is fueling really this discussion, right? Companies who are using now the European Sovereign Cloud, I think they already used AWS in the past, because otherwise they couldn't adopt it that fast, right? So it's somehow that this is a hot topic, right? When I talked with Jon about this, it's really like Kubernetes thing, right? So it's a hot topic at the moment. Everyone needs it. No one knows really why. Because in the end, you buy in service leakage, right? This is one important thing. Like the article points out, Bedrock is not fully available, as we talk about generative AI as an important topic, right? And you have higher prices, right? So you really need to think of whether it's really worth or not. From a German FSI customer perspective, you really need to clarify what is your data criticality level, right? Do I process just transactional data? Do I process customer data? Do I process medical related data, right? And based on that discussion, you can decide whether I go to an on-premise solution, whether I go to European Sovereignty Cloud, or I just put it into AWS, right? The second question, basically, which is not talked through that article, is definitely encryption, right? So this is also something we negotiated a lot. I worked, before I joined my current employer, I worked for a German insurance company, and we talked 9 months about the usage of KMS, right? The key management service, and in which flavor we can use it. So it's really not a new topic in the end. It's on this hype cycle, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nail on the head, really, isn't it? That's people say they need this, but they can't ever articulate why. And this was a thing that I was saying, half a dozen years ago, is if you were saying to me back then that we'd have the level of fluff and worry about data sovereignty now, I'd have not believed you. It's a data sovereignty. Nobody cares. Who's going to care? But it feels a bit, people want it, but they don't quite understand why. There's a few firms in here. I mean, I haven't heard of any of them because I'm not German, but their use cases kind of make sense. It's a financial services place. It's a hospital. It's
software as a service, right?
Yeah. It's a metering firm that do things, and they're just sort of saying, well, we kind of needed to make sure that we were completely isolated within, and we don't trust the US. And they're not saying that in this, but it's, they keep talking about EU-based personnel and subject to EU law and all this malarkey, which is the whole, we're not subject to the Cloud Act and all that jazz. But when you really pull back the covers, okay, yes, the kit's in the EU, the staff are all from the EU, all the way up to the top of the business. That's great. The business is still owned by Amazon Inc. So how isolated actually is that? I think we'd need to see a test case in a court somewhere to work out how isolated that really is. We'd have to see someone invoking the Cloud Act over in the States to get data out of sovereign cloud, and Amazon, whichever subsidiary of this, just going, no.
You're not having it. Yeah.
Basically, we already had a legal court case, right, where a Canadian judge requested data from one of the European cloud provider, native cloud provider, right? And under FISA, they also needed to hand over the data, right? So if there's someone willing to get your data on this legal way, this is probably not the solution. But anyway, for all who are now listening and say, well, what's actually the relation? As I said, the insurance company requested the information from AWS, how many legal requests you're processing per year. And in 2023, I don't know, they had 10,000. Did they target any enterprise account? No. Did they push out any enterprise related data? No, right? So there are already strong controls in place where AWS is trying to challenge data information requests from American authorities, like CIA, FBI. Yeah.
I mean, as I've said when we've spoken about this before, if everything's properly encrypted and the customers are controlling the keys, then these providers should not be able to give the data anyway. You need to go to the owner of the key to actually decrypt the data to make it usable.
Well, this is the funny point about default keys and Amazon managed keys, is that it's turnkey encryption. It's theatre. You can't prove that it's encrypted outside of Amazon saying it is. The only way you could do that is if you did all the encryption yourself.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Client-side encryption, and then, I don't know, you may have the control in the end. That's right.
But I think you're right, Malte, that these are people who are already very heavily invested in AWS, and the political climate has changed, and they're faced with the decision of, do we pull it all out of AWS and put it in a Hetznet, or other European cloud providers are available.
But
obviously that's an enormous amount of work to, particularly if you've been using kind of AWS native serverless type services, etc., to rewrite all of that code to work somewhere else, migrate all of the data somewhere else. It's an enormous, for the particularly for the scale of organizations that are mentioned in this article who are adopting this cloud. This is probably, even though it's more expensive, a much easier and more cost-effective option for them just to move it all in there. The services remain the same. Nothing has to be refactored. Nothing has to be, well, it has to be migrated, I suppose. But standard AWS region to sovereign cloud, I think, is going to be better, easier than to a non-AWS platform. So, we'll keep talking about it. And sorry, go on.
Yeah, and finally, right, we are talking now about one region, right? And AWS says, okay, design for disaster, for example, right? So why we are not, we are talking about black and white, AWS, yes or no. In the end, you can have your normal EU Central 1 region in Frankfurt, for example, and use this new one in the same organization for certain purposes, right? So it's a technical design implementation, right? Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Well, there we go. We've got the answer to some of the organizations who are adopting the European Sovereign Cloud. And we shall see how that continues to develop over time and see what other interesting tests may come along from the legal system for whether, that is a robust enough control for your sensitive data. But on that note, we have reached the end of our time for Season 5, Episode 20 of Logicast. So it just remains for me to thank you, Malte, for joining us today as our guest and for sharing your insights, particularly as a local to the European Sovereign Cloud. Great to hear from someone close to that particular topic. And thank you, Jon, as always, particularly for sporting your Datadog t-shirt while we mentioned that vendor on the podcast today. So thank you very much for listening. If you have made it this far, we hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have, please give us a like and a rating. We are available on YouTube and from wherever you download your podcasts. We will be back next week. No, we won't. I'm on holiday next week. So we'll be back the week after next with another episode of Logicast for you. Until then, thank you very much for listening. Thanks again to our guests and to my co-host, Jon. We will see you again next time.